Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Ellen Fanning. Coming up, fueling the future as EVs enter the market, what's ahead for the humble service station? Well, the federal government has us on the highway to an electric vehicle future. Last month it launched its national EV strategy, beginning consultation on fuel efficiency standards and offering $70 million in funding for charging infrastructure to accelerate the transition.
We know this technology is developing so fast. We're seeing more and more car manufacturers, new cars are coming out all the time, and we are just not getting them here in this country, and it's ridiculous, frankly. We've got to get the charging infrastructure right and deal with those issues around range anxiety and deal with issues as models come into the market around utes and towing and all of those things, and that's happening. But really, this is about choice.
Service stations are hoping for a big slice of the charging infrastructure funding, saying they are up for $500,000 to upgrade each site. And they're starting to rethink what post-petrol servos will look like, with better food and lounges while we wait for our shiny new EVs to charge up. Mark McKenzie is the CEO of the Australasian Convenience and Petroleum Marketers Association, which I'd never heard of until today, which represents service station operators, and he joins us now. Hello.
Hi, Ellen.
When I see service stations on the side of the road, I declare to my children, it's going to be a block of flats.
Yep.
10 years, 15 years, that's a block of flats. Isn't that the reality? That's what's going to happen.
No, the simple reality is that's not what's going to happen. So if you think about a typical service station today, it's worth about $7 million these days, an average servo. So if we go back to, say, 15 years ago, it was worth about $2 million, a million site cleanup. So it made sense to sell that business and develop it into residential development.
And that's important what you said, site cleanup, because you've got all those tanks
under
the ground that over 50 years have been leaking out little bits of petrol. So you've got to pop those tanks out, you've got to clean up the soil. It's a big deal.
Yep. Whereas what's happened, that cleanup cost hasn't moved, but the value of service stations has almost tripled
block
in the
of
last
flats.
15 years.
Yeah.
They're now worth more than you would get from a block of flats as a commercial investment. And what we found through COVID in particular is these assets became very resilient because we didn't close service stations down. They became a focus for small format retail. If you were stuck in Melbourne through COVID and you needed to go for a walk and get a coffee, you typically went down to the service station because it was one of the few that sold it. So what we've seen happening, if you think about, we've got 8,100 service stations in every local community in the country. In a lot of cases, if you go to local small towns, we're the last main retail outlet that sits in some of those local towns. And so we've gone through a quiet evolution, certainly in the last 15 years, where it's become a focus of retail, not just of fuel, but of hospitality, groceries, and in some cases, general services.
Okay, and so how long have they got in terms of that transition, and what's your view of the future for them?
Yep. So that's the multi-million-dollar question. You were talking earlier about the transition that comes in relation to energy. It's no different in terms of fuel. So if we think about last year, we sold 40,000 EVs.
Yep.
We sold 970,000 petrol and diesel vehicles. Now, each of those petrol and diesel vehicles will stay in the fleet typically for 17 or 18 years. So if you think about that timeline, it really boils down to how quickly we start to replace it. Well, we've got a lot of vehicles, almost 1 million that were sold last year, that are going to be here in 2040. So the challenge for us is to diversify, not to make a wholesale change where we go from diesel and petrol straight to electric vehicles, but to slowly change. We talk in the industry about demand destruction. So what we're going to see is our fuel and diesel will slowly start to go down each year as we get more and more EVs and the petrol and diesel vehicles start to retire out. And then what the business will need to do to remain viable is find alternative sources of revenue. And there's two strategies in our industry. So if we think about the big two brands, two of them are going down the path of saying, well, we'll put electric vehicle charging on the forecourt and we'll earn money from that to supplement our fuel revenue. There's some questions about whether that's actually going to be profitable, but that's a strategy people are pursuing at the moment.
Or you could go, it's a shop.
That's right.
It's a shop.
Yep. So the other two, and we've seen some very big moves just recently, one announcement this week and one a couple of weeks ago, that are saying, no, we're going to go big on the shop and hospitality. So the roadhouses are reappearing in regional areas. The cafes are appearing in metro areas. And that's been a change we've seen over about a decade.
Topaz, you had how many decades in retail?
Yeah, 2 decades in retail.
Okay, right. So I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you this. This is really interesting. How do you, I'm going to really mix metaphors because I'm living in Queensland now and I can, it's expected of me, Topaz. How do you unpeel this onion? Because it's chicken and eggs. See what I did there? The longer it takes for you to be able to charge up your EV easily, the longer people will hold off and buy those internal combustion engines, right? So as a business, what do? Do you drive into the future? Do you leap into the future and say that's where it's going? Or do you say, well, the longer I hold out with petrol Bowsers, the more inconvenient it is for people to buy EVs and the more I safeguard and sandbag my business?
Yes, I think it's the one thing that I've learnt over the past 2 decades in retail is consumers want whatever they want is what they eventually get. A lot of the changes are driven by consumers as well, and so I think it's a direction that we're heading in as a country in terms of anything that we can do that's scalable in terms of becoming greener is a good thing for us. But the reality is it's not going away. I think the numbers that we've just spoken about then shows that this is not disappearing. But again, any way that you're looking at these approaches from a national level, you do it in a staged approach. So you're actually using the data, making sure that where you're moving quicker needs to happen because it shows you that that's your demographic in your area and the sales are happening in that direction. Some regions won't need to do it for a long time, but it's about, I think, educating yourself and it's not going away. And so I think it's actually about, well, what's the most reasonable way to move forward and, what roles the government got in supporting, especially those smaller organisations who may not have the resources at their fingertips and talking about where I still get my car filled up by an independent and they come out and fill your car up. Those still service things matter. But I think it's about helping all of the industry to make the transition in a way that it doesn't topple it over.
Yeah. I did a terrible thing, Topaz. I went and got a coffee this morning at my local servo and I took some photos. That was the coffee area. I don't know whether you can see it, but I did mention to the young person, oh, look, there's the food offering. Seriously. Seriously. Just what would induce you to spend any more time there, Mark, than...
Well, I think what you've...
I had a little clean-up, by the way.
What you've seen there is what we call a grab and go. So it's typically set up for the tradies, and my guess is what's happened there is you've come in after the tradies have been in and done all their splashing about. But if you have a look at sites now, you actually see some sites that go from that level of serve your own to I'll serve you, bake on premises, barista-style coffee. So
there are a lot of... chewing gum stains, the black chewing gum stains in the forecourt. Yeah, I could go on.
Yep.
If I had to recharge an EV and it took me any more than about 90 seconds, which is not technologically feasible at this point in time, I wouldn't do it. And I certainly wouldn't sit down, Kerry.
Yeah, but can I say, look, I'm the oldest person on this panel by far. When I was a kid growing up, it was really exciting to be able to go to the servo. When you went there, you put your petrol in and you were able to buy your newspaper, and you didn't actually have to go up to the newsagents, on a Sunday morning and buy the newspaper, right? So, look, it mightn't have been the best experience for you, but I think that service stations, and congratulations to your industry, they are now providing a very, very useful service to a much broader community. For a lot of people, if you're older, for example, and you don't go out every day of the week, and you've got to go and put your petrol in your car, you go up to the service station, you probably have a chat to the guy behind the counter, you probably pick up your milk and your bread for the week, you might pick up a magazine, and I actually think that's an incredibly good service.
And you're working with a company at the moment just to declare it, that is looking at what this might look like, this fast charging infrastructure, this converting existing infrastructure might look like. How fast do you think this would happen?
Well, we're not looking at service stations, so I need to clear that up front.
Okay.
We're looking at I'm working with a company which is looking to retrofit into other existing infrastructure, which I'm under an NDA, so I can't go into too much detail. But we've looked at it and we've said, one of the things we need to look at when we're doing that sort of servicing is what will keep someone in the place, in this site, so that they will have enough time, feel comfortable about sitting there and charging up their car. And one of the things which we will be looking to put into all those sites is a cafe, because people want to be able to sit down. They'll sit there, they'll have a look, they'll be on their phones. We'll have a television up so they can watch you on TV, Ellen, while they're actually charging up their car and having a coffee. And I think that's what will happen. And I think it's all because we are much more demanding of service these days than we've ever been. We've been through COVID where we were all locked inside. It's actually really nice now to get out and engage with people, which I think is, as I said, all power to your members, because I think that's what they're doing really well.
Noel, it is chicken and egg. Until we get the charging infrastructure in place, people are reluctant or anxious. They have range anxiety. They suddenly think they're going to drive 300 kilometres, which, when was the last time you drove 300 kilometres? But anyway, so the question becomes, for those people who need a quick fill-up, who aren't recharging their car at home, who aren't recharging their car under their building where they work at their work, maybe the sun isn't shining, maybe there's been terrible weather for a while and you want to come charge it up. Should the government have any role in providing some incentives for independents, or I don't even know, major fuel companies to start making that transition and making those recharging stations available?
I think this is becoming the sharpest question in the whole EV subject. At what point does this become a business, the EV sector become a business that can sustain itself without government subsidies? Because, right now, you look at the vast majority of the public charging stations, they're being built by with state government money, with federal territory government money. The ACT is very active. Port Phillip Council down here, you reckon they can put one up for between $60,000 and $100,000. So I think there's a conversation to be had about where the industry is getting its figures for $500,000 per servo. But 40,000 vehicles sold last year. There's obviously a huge question mark about how many of those would have left the lot without the various tax concessions, rebates, and the opportunities to charge those vehicles up for free. And I think, the fair play to the industry, your guest there wouldn't be doing his job if he wasn't trying to go into bat for his members to get some of this action. But I think that this is something that's going to have to resolve itself in the next couple of years. I think if this transition is going to be the real thing, people are going to have to be able to make money from this, because there's no way Jim Chalmers is dipping his hand into his pocket for $500,000 for every servo in Australia. I think we can, safely surmise that. So that's the big tension, and that's the question that needs to be answered for me, probably in the next couple of years. What's going to be commercial and what isn't? If I knew that, I'd be driving a nice Tesla for myself. Am I allowed to say that on the ABC?
But I just deal with much worse mail than whatever will come from that, Mark.
There's a really interesting point here, because all EV charging is not the same. So the sort of EV charging we're just talking about now it's slow charging, 50 kilowatts. So the vehicle has to stay plugged into the vehicle for 5 hours. Even in the service station industry, we're not expecting people to stop at a service station for 5 hours and sit in a cafe. So when we start to talk about even the number that we've given in terms of 500,000 for a single two-plug charger, we've actually got about 80 sites that are expending more than $1 million in that installation. And it's not the charger, it's the fact that the grid does not give us enough power to charge at that high rate, the 250 to 350 kilowatts.
That would allow for fast charging.
That would allow for fast. So what's happening is our service station businesses are having to augment the grid, so to improve the energy network.
Again, it's all chicken and egg, right?
That's right, yeah. So it's that challenge. I think at the moment we're talking about it too simplistically. All EV charging is not the same. We're expecting in our industry 80% of charging will occur in the home. We can't accommodate it at the service station network. So we're only focusing on that 20% of rapid charge. That's
where you've stuffed
element.
up the charging, the sun isn't shining.
That's
you
right.
live in a unit block that will not put it on. Maybe it's cheaper and you've worked out the cost per kilowatt hour at home and it's cheaper to do it there. Yep. Adam, finally to you, you've got a much more utopian idea of what these places could be like.
Yeah, one of many utopian ideas I peddle out there. But look, firstly, can I just say, I think particularly for the service stations that are owned by large multinational oil and gas companies that have been monetizing oil for decades, I would imagine they would see that as part of their social responsibility to invest in further electric vehicle charging. To be honest, to many of their proclaimed efforts towards net zero, I think that would be a very obvious thing that they would do as an industry. In terms of my utopian ideal, look, I think if people are going to be spending 15 minutes for rapid charging at some of these places, let's turn them into circularity hubs. Let's turn them into places where if you're spending 15 minutes there, you fill up your electric vehicle with all of the items that you want to recycle, all the desegregated waste you've got, all of the soft plastics you've got, or you know, let's use them as places like the buy nothing community where we can exchange items with each other. Let's transform the service station into a kind of icon of the new economy where we do more than just charge our vehicles, but participate in kind of circular initiatives more broadly. I can see that as being an appealing way to get sticky customers inside service stations beyond coffee and donuts.
Sound good?
I think that sounds like a great idea, but I think Mark will say to you, we won't have the space to do that. Given what's going on at the moment, if you've already got Bowsers and you've got your ice machines and everything else, and you've got your area over there where people are pumping up their tyres, and now you're going to put a charger in, where are you going to put your recycling in?
Yeah, and I think the key thing...
But I love the idea. Absolutely, all power to the idea.
But I think the key thing here is we need to shift away from thinking them as a servo. They are a retail outlet, small format, that happens to sell a lot of fuel. What's been happening over the last 15 years is we're now switching that. So as the fuel comes off, we'll be putting more into hospitality, we'll be putting more into groceries.
And
We're
may I
setting up
suggest...
click and collect.
Yes, may I suggest wiping down the benches? Just a suggestion. Just a suggestion. Mark Mackenzie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Alan.
CEO of the Service Station Lobby, the ACAPMA. There you are.
Thank you.